Hey guys, this is your best friend in programming, Kodajit, and in today's video I'm going to talk about a technology that I'm very excited about, and I think that this is the technology that I will be programming my web applications in next. In fact, I'm going to use it very extensively now because it is something that really blew me away when I first heard about it, and then I read about it, and then I read the technical specs. I was totally impressed by what it is trying to achieve. Guys, I'm talking about .NET Blazor. In case you haven't heard of it before, it's a new framework for web development from Microsoft that has a totally radical way of web dev compared to everything else that was here before. Think of it as a framework that kind of replaces single page application frameworks like React or Vue, but with a very attractive proposition, and that is being able to use C# not just for your backend coding but also for your front end coding. So actually what it does is it uses a technology that enables you to run C# in the browser. This technology is called WebAssembly, and actually this is now quite mature, and it's a part of every browser. No matter which browser do you use, as long as it's a modern browser, it will support WebAssembly. I'm talking about Chrome, I'm talking about Firefox, Safari, any browser that is modern, it supports WebAssembly out of the box. And using WebAssembly, you can execute any code in the browser itself as long as there is a port for it. So Microsoft developed a WebAssembly port for C# inside of the browsers. It connected C# to the browsers. So now you can run C# in the browser just like you could only run JavaScript in the past. What does that mean? You can code your backend, your entire business logic of your software in C#, and then you can code your entire client logic, all the front end logic too, in C# too. There is no need of JavaScript, and that gives you access to the entire .NET framework on the front end of the browser. Now that is a killer proposition. Earlier, when you were using only JavaScript, you had to use either very limited libraries, or if you were using libraries from NPM or Bower, you would be exposed to a lot of non-standard code to do the same old thing. And even though the ecosystem is quite mature in JavaScript right now, I find it kind of chaotic, and I really prefer the security of .NET when it comes to building enterprise applications or applications that have good documentation. It's very important. If you're trying to create a complicated app with a lot of functionality, documentation always helps. So when you have access to standardized documentation, it makes your job easier. And having access to the entire .NET Core framework in the assembly itself, that is a killer deal. It really opens up your opens you up to a lot of powerful development capabilities. And earlier I was coding in C#. I was using .NET Core to code the backend, and for the front end I was using JavaScript and your favorite JavaScript library. I was usually using jQuery and others too. But with this, you don't need to use any of that. You can just connect your code directly to the backend. Even don't need to do any kind of communication magic. You don't need to write any kind of connectivity code. It just is directly exposed to your front end, and that makes things really easy. Now Blazor, it comes in two flavors. There is the Blazor server, the server-side execution model, and there is the Blazor WebAssembly, which is the client-side execution model. Now, just to be clear, both of them actually use the WebAssembly technology, but there is a difference between Blazor server and Blazor WebAssembly, and we'll talk about that next. So let's first talk about Blazor server-side. Now Blazor server-side, what it does is it will let you run and execute the code for all your work, the front end and the back end, both on the server itself. Right, so you would actually not be executing any code on the browser. Anytime something changes, the browser will communicate with the server, and the server will send the changed state of the browser. So when you click on a button, the button will be clicked on the back end. the button click will be communicated to the backend. The server, the browser structure will be changed on the backend, and then the change will be sent to your front end, and the change will be reflected there. So most of the heavy coding work, the heavy processing work, it's all done on your server. And frankly speaking, when I read about Blazor server side, I wasn't very excited first. This was actually the first version of Blazor that was released. It was released early on last year. It became quite a mainstream technology last year, but I couldn't touch it. I didn't want to touch it because I create apps for thousands of users. I want my apps to be mainstream, and I do create SaaS, but I don't create SaaS just for one customer or 10 or 15 nodes or 10 or 15 users. Typically, I want my applications to be available to as many people as possible. And Blazor server side has a limitation. It communicates with the front end and the server. The communication between the front end and the server is using SignalR. Now SignalR is a real-time communication library from Blazor, from Microsoft, and I've used it before. It's a pretty good library. I created a chat function for one of my applications, a webinar application using SignalR, and we use SignalR to also do the RTC, WebRTC work in that application. It's a pretty mature technology, very easy to use. And in Blazor server side, it's pretty transparent. You don't need to write any SignalR code. You don't even need to know SignalR. It's just going to happen in its own. And you won't really know that there is something called SignalR that's been in play. But if you are going to ask me to execute all the code on the server, virtually keep a representation of your browser, of every user's browser on the server, maintain the representation on the server continuously for every change, and only communicate the changes back and forth, even though the communication itself is not really a taxing thing because they're very, very small, bytes of messages sent, the processing is difficult because let's say you have 100 people simultaneously connected to your server using the application. It's going to overload the server very, very fast, and your server cost will be higher if you're using things like Azure or any other technologies, like cloud technologies which cost a bomb. You're going to have to pay a lot. And of course, the more load you have on the server, the slower your site will be. So frankly speaking, when it comes to Blazor server side, the only people I could see or I can see using Blazor server side are enterprise level developers who are making a custom project for a company for an implementation in a small organization or a medium sized or even a large organization, but not having many users, not like several thousand users. So if you are developing a custom app for internal use by an organization, maybe an internal ERP or something like that, this is going to work fine, and it's going to probably cut your processing time, cut your coding time. But this is not something which you would want to code a SaaS in. But there is a technology from Microsoft, Blazor, that is quite mature for SaaS. And I'm talking about Blazor client side. You can see it on my screen right now. Blazor client side is very different from Blazor server side in the sense this time now, nearly all the code executes on the client side, on the customer's browser. And this is quite liberating for someone like me who wants to, in fact, actually move as much processing to the customer's browser as possible, because that will allow me to keep my backend server very, very light. I don't really need to do much on the backend server, so I can just take up a very cheap server, no need to pay too much for it, and most of the work will be done on the customer's computer, which is already quite capable, quite fast. If they're using my SaaS, they are dedicated, they've loaded it up on the screen and they are dedicated to it, so definitely they're going to actually feel the speed, because when things are running on the real time on your computer, the speed is much more superior when than compared to if the app has to go to the server back and forth and communicate data. So this is actually very good for SaaS products, and I intend to create a lot of SaaS products using the Blazor client-side technology. Now there is one thing I want to tell you. You can't really code every kind of application in Blazor client-side because there is a very slow startup. Now what practically happens is, anytime somebody loads up a Blazor client-side application, they have to download the entire .NET Core framework that you're using in the app. That's not a trivial download. It's going to be something like 30-40 MBs or maybe 100 MBs or so. It's not too much by today's standard. It's going to take like some seconds, maybe a minute at most. But if you are somebody who's concerned about a big download for your customers, that might not be this might not be a good choice for you, especially if you're trying to create a site like a news site or a CMS. You cannot create the next WordPress in here, right? So that is something that is going to be a deal breaker for news or CMS or content kind of sites. But for SaaS product, it's not going to be a deal breaker at all, because again, this startup is only done once. So the first time the person comes to your website, runs the website, there has to be a download of the framework, and never again. So it's not really a deal breaker, because every time they come in again, it's going to load up very fast, and the entire experience of using the application is going to be an amazing experience, because the application is going to work faster every single time. Now, I'll tell you this. With Blazor client side, you don't even need a server. You can load up your entire app on a standard CDN. You can deliver a standard file. No need to have any kind of IIS or any PHP or Linux or any kind of server running there. Just standard static file would do the job. Think about it. It's going to make your delivery even more speedier, because you can just have a CDN. You can have a small file. Your project can be hosted anywhere, and people will be going to the website. They'll be able to quickly run the project. Of course, the download will come from Microsoft servers, the framework download, but they'll be able to run the project from any website, and your server hosting costs are going to be ridiculously low. So I really love this about Blazor client side. It's going to be a really good project for good product for SaaS and SPAs. Now, Blazor client side Blazor is all about SPAs, or single page applications. You can create some killer quality SPAs. If you've been using something like React or Angular or Vue, this is, in my opinion, quite a superior technology, and I will be talking about that. I'll not be able to cover every single nuance of Blazor or the technical details in a single video, but I intend to do a complete series on Blazor, trying to teach you how to use it, how to set it up, and from zero, and then go on and create a professional project in Blazor. So do subscribe and like my video, because more videos like this are coming. Now again, not having a server on the backend is not a requirement, it's an option. So if you do have a server on the backend, or if you have a server anywhere, you can communicate with the server using HTTP. And this is something that you would be used to if you're using any kind of front-end framework. If you've been using jQuery or React or Vue or any other kind of framework, you're already communicating with the backend server using HTTP. And here, Blazor client side again gives you the same option, but with an easier system, because you will be running the same technology on the front end that you're running on the back end. So your back end can be coded in C#. You can use the pretty much same data and object models to make your job easier, and just return the content data in JSON format, which can be consumed by your front end code. Or you can actually have your backend done in any other platform too if you want. You can have your backend, for example, in Node. Nothing's going to stop you from having your backend in Node and the front end in Blazor. And I might actually do that myself for a couple of application and use cases that I have in my mind. Now let's go to the next question, the learning curve. And as a programmer, I know this is something that all of us are absolutely concerned about every single time. There are so many new technologies in the market. Every month there is something new, something hot, and everyone, even I'm confused about what to learn next, and if something is really going to be practical a year or 2 years down the line. Now I got to tell you, there are some positives for Blazor in this department. Firstly, this is based on the .NET Core framework. Actually, this is based on it is an evolution of the Xamarin framework, the Mono framework that was created to be portable. It can run on Linux, it can run on Mac, it can run on mobile phones, it can run on Windows, of course. So this is quite a universal framework. .NET Core runs anywhere, nearly anywhere. And Blazor, that's why, is quite powerful, because it can let you run your apps on every single operating system out there, from mobile phones to desktops. Your websites are going to be working fine in every single platform right inside the browser. Now the good thing is, This is all based on C#. You can code in C# on the back end or the front end. So you don't have to learn different things to do the same thing, right? So in the back end, you could be coding in C#, communicating with your databases or whatever. On the front end, you don't need to write JavaScript. You can continue with .NET Core, you can continue with C#. So it makes your learning very, very easy because it practically removes 50% of the learning. You don't have to learn separate languages to do separate things. C# can be applied everywhere. So in my opinion, you learn this once and it's going to save a lot of your time for the future. Again, I think if you're already coming from a C# world, if you've coded in C# earlier, the most amount of trouble you're going to have is with the nuances of the component structure. Now, to display your website on the browser, Blazor uses something called the Razor component model, and this is a bit different from anything that you used before. I've used MVC, I've used ASP pages, I've used ASP.NET pages, I've used Razor pages, I've used .NET Core to ASP.NET Core, of course, that's what I'm talking about. So practically every single platform in the .NET world, I have used them, and Razor component is absolutely different than any one of those. If you have been using React or Vue, I would say this is the closest to the Vue component model. So all of the data inside your displayed page can be divided into component. Each component can stand independently. It can have its own HTML, own reactive code, like earlier it was in JavaScript and Vue, but here you're going to write it in C#, own CSS files, own database backend. So everything can be quite independent, and then you can just put those components together to create your application. It's not difficult and it's not overly complex, but this is going to be a new idea even if you're coming from C# world or .NET world, and you will have to learn that. Now again, I have talked about Razor components before. Think of them like React or Vue components. They are self-enclosed parts of your website that can be put together to build a complex web project. And I got to tell you, you can do some pretty complicated work with these. Now let's talk about why to use Blazor. Why would you use Blazor? Now first question, are you in the .NET ecosystem? If you are in .NET, it's a no-brainer. Just go for it. I have been programming in .NET for over 20 years now, and I started with Node.js because I was increasingly frustrated with the limitations of .NET, especially when it came to SPAs, single page applications. I didn't really find a good way to create an SPA with using the complete tool set, the complete reactive tool set available to me, which could make my job easier. So I was actually programming in Node.js. I made a couple of projects in Node.js, and I was implementing Vue in my organization. And then I saw Blazor, and I saw how easy it was to create an SPA from scratch. You don't actually need libraries with this thing. So I decided to move to this. So if you're coming from the .NET ecosystem, this is going to be a no-brainer. You're going to be able to code very, very fast. Again, it gives you a single language for client and server. I've talked about this before. It's a no-brainer. It's got a very powerful component model, very, very powerful. I'm impressed by Razor component, and of course, I'm still mastering those nuances too. But so far, what I've seen is pretty cool. Now, it runs on every single modern browser and OS. We talked about it, and it's got the power of .NET Core and C#. So why would you use Blazor? Now, one thing that I haven't mentioned before, and this is, there is another new platform coming up from Microsoft called the .NET MAUI. And Blazor integrates very well with that. And now MAUI is for creating native applications for every platform that you can imagine. It works on Windows desktop. It works on Mac desktop, Mac OS. It works on Android, and it works on iPhone too. iPhones, iOS too. So basically, you can create one app in .NET MAUI, and you can run it pretty much everywhere. Now, the beauty of Blazor combined with MAUI is MAUI has a project type called Blazor MAUI project. So you can write your interface in Blazor, you can do the backend in Blazor, you can do your backend in MAUI, and you will have an application that runs on the web, in the browser. It runs on desktop, on Windows, on Mac, and it runs on mobile phones, on iPhone and Android. So think about it. That's for the first time a truly universal application that runs on every single platform without you having to code it over and over again. So you can write one app. use it in the browser, use it on the desktop or mobile phones as a native app too. Now that is something really radical, and it opens up some great new opportunities. You could code an amazing amount of cool stuff using this technology. So I would say I would be very happy to implement Blazor just to have access to .NET MAUI later using the same tech, which I know I will be able to use to create some really cool stuff myself. Why would you not want to use Blazor? First, you don't know any C#, you've been using JavaScript or PHP or any other platform early on and you're not ready to learn C#. Don't use it. The Blazor is not for you. Blazor is all about C#, and C# is, in my opinion, a very, very powerful language. It's a top class language now, especially after C# 9 and 10. It's got every single feature that you could hope for from a mature language. So I love it. But if you don't want to learn C#, Blazor is not for you. Second, you want to run on older browsers. Blazor is not going to run on browsers that are not WebAssembly compatible. So if you are stuck in a situation where you gotta run something on Internet Explorer, maybe you are making something for an enterprise that is running on legacy hardware or legacy software, you won't be able to use Blazor. So stick with PHP, or you're making a CMS. I've talked about this before. You can't make WordPress in this because the load time is too high. People need to see content like news or social media sites or content sites immediately. They need to see the rendering immediately. That's not going to happen with Blazor. Next, you want to use JavaScript. Now, if you're going to use JavaScript on the front end, what's the point of using Blazor, which is letting you use C#? Now, again, you can actually do it using JavaScript interop. You can even communicate between JavaScript and C#. But frankly speaking, I think it defeats the purpose and you don't need to do that. What you can do instead is stick with Node.js, Vue, Electron, React. These are all amazing mature platforms. I have used all of them. And I can tell you, it's not a vital thing to use Blazor, but you can use it if you want to use the technologies that I talked about. But if not, then Node.js and Electron, these two technologies can combine, give you the pretty much same amount of access. With Node.js, you can create amazing web applications, back and front end, again, both of them written in JavaScript. And with Electron, combined with Node.js, you can create applications for the desktop too. Blazor, of course, also gives you, in future, in combination with .NET MAUI, access to the mobile platforms too. So that's an add-on. So again, this concludes my introductory video to Blazor. And so I'm going to do a series of videos on Blazor showing you step by step how to get started with Blazor and the technologies that you need to learn to be able to create quality applications in it. So stick with me, subscribe to this channel, like this video, and I'll be seeing you soon. This is your best friend in programming, Kodajit, signing off.